Since Blade is now a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, most fans' knowledge of the Daywalking Vampire Hunter is pretty much limited to the Wesley Snipes films, so here's a little refresher on the real story of Eric Brooks that's not quite the same. We first meet Blade alongside a team of vampire hunters in 1973's Tomb of Dracula number 10, with a look inspired by actors of that era, most specifically Jim Brown. But before we get to this point in his life, let's go all the way back to the beginning. Eric was actually born in London in 1929 after his mother Tara Cross had fled to England following his father Lucas's arrest in Latveria. The two had actually been members of a weird secret society vampire fan club, so Tara found shelter in a brothel owned by another member of this club and changed her name to Vanessa Brooks. But she's found by the mad scientist turned vampire Deacon Frost, who kills her while she's in labor. Eric survives though, and for a good while thinks he's just a regular human, even though he knew a vampire had killed his mother and he would dedicate his life to getting revenge. He's raised in the brothel, but becomes close with retired American vampire hunter Jamal Afari after saving him from a group of vampires. Jamal trains Eric how to fight and hunt, and together they clean up the streets of London, up until Eric mistakes a sick person for a vampire and kills them, forcing him to dip out as Jamal takes the fall for the murder. After his first attempt to join a team doesn't work out, he later finds Jamal turned into a vampire and is forced to kill the closest thing to a father he ever had. He then goes to China, where he joins a new team of amateur vampire hunters, who further train him, give him the name Blade, and become his first family of sorts. In an attempt to slay Dracula, they end up tricking the Lord of Vampires into a cave where almost all of them are killed except for Blade, who Dracula spares to make an example. Faced with the loss of his mentors, he arms himself with a combination of those supplies to honor them, creating what would be his first hero costume in the comics. All he keeps of his own is his jacket, which he had gotten from Wolverine years ago. Blade then goes to New York City, where he forms the first Mighty Avengers team with Blue Marvel, Luke Cage's father James Greery, and Doctor Strange's enemy Kalu, to fight an army of Deathwalkers, which are sorcerers that had become vampires while seeking immortality through dark magic. Around this time, Blade began a romantic relationship with Saffron Calder, which we would see continue long after the Tomb of Dracula series ended. As he travels back to London to see her, he runs into Quincy Harker, who's trained by the legendary vampire hunter Abraham Van Helsing after his father originally helped him defeat Dracula, and later took in Abraham's granddaughter Rachel as his own protege after Dracula killed her parents. They formed a team with Frank Drake, a descendant of Dracula's, in an effort to finally take down the Lord of Vampires, so naturally Blade joins them as they chase Dracula across Europe. It was after he's bitten and nearly killed by Dracula that Blade learns he has an immunity to vampire bites, which would pretty much be his only power for the next 20 years in comics. Blade's newfound abilities remind him of his original mission to kill Deacon Frost, the vampire responsible for his mother's death that gave him said abilities, so he splits from the group to continue his hunt. This leads to his encounter with Hannibal King, a detective turned into a vampire by Frost, who's hunting him down as well. The two proceed to find Deacon Frost and kill him. Meanwhile, back in Transylvania, Quincy Harker makes the ultimate sacrifice, rigging Dracula's castle with explosives and trapping the Lord of Vampires with himself in it, thus killing both of them and ending the Tomb of Dracula story in 1979. Blade actually gets bored for a while until he's reunited with Hannibal and Frank 5 years later by Doctor Strange to stop Dracula once and for all, as he's resurrected by the Darkholders, an ancient cult that created the first ever vampire thousands of years ago. Strange gets the vampire hunters to stall Dracula as he transports him to the astral plane, where he subsequently kills Dracula and erases all vampires from existence. The fight sequence between Strange and Dracula also happens to be illustrated quite well. Blade continues to work with Hannibal and Frank as a supernatural private investigator under the name Borderline Incorporated until 1991's Tomb of Dracula miniseries, where we actually see Blade in a slightly updated costume. But at the end of this series, he has a mental breakdown after witnessing Dracula's brief resurrection and is admitted to a psychiatric hospital. You'll come to find that Dracula gets resurrected in the comics so many times that it's not even worth keeping up. Doctor Strange arranges for Blade's release and destroys his old costume to signify a fresh start, as we see Blade permanently switch to his Matrix-style look that he's known for today. Strange has Blade form the Night Stalkers with Frank and Hannibal to once again tackle supernatural threats. They go against Ghost Rider and Johnny Blaze, but after misunderstanding, they all briefly form the Midnight Suns with Doctor Strange and Morbius to fight the Bride of Satan. Blade is even temporarily corrupted by the Darkhold at one point, but he gets better. In the end, Doctor Strange's spell that eliminated vampires wears off, and the Night Stalkers face Verne, the first ever vampire created by the Darkholders, and Frank and Hannibal die in the ensuing fight to destroy him. This more or less marks marked the end of the classic Blade era, as he made his television debut in the Spider-Man animated series a year later as a half-vampire, raised in New Orleans and trained by Whistler, an original character created for the show. In 1998, elements of his portrayal there would carry over into the film with Wesley Snipes, most notably him being a half-vampire, born in the US and trained by this Whistler guy. Regardless, movie synergy had taken over Blade in the comics, as he had a series released almost simultaneously with the first film, where he's drawn to look almost identical to Snipes, and a year later, after Blade ends up being Marvel's first successful film, he's turned into a half-vampire by Morbius, ironically in a Spider-Man comic of all places. A week before the sequel released in 2002, Marvel published a new Blade series that introduced a new breed of vampires that fed off other vampires, much like the villains in the film. In his next miniseries in 2006, Blade is summoned by Dr. Doom to travel back in time and save the villain's mother from prison. He also manages to unknowingly free his own father as well, who in turn becomes a vampire and captures Blade in an attempt to fulfill his cult's crazy prophecy that will seemingly free the souls of all vampires. Blade resists helping his father. The prophecy gets fulfilled anyway, but it instead brings back every vampire that was ever killed, starting a whole new chapter in Blade's universe. After then, we see Blade in a lot of team-ups, as being with a team just seems to be his thing. He joins a Black Ops superhero team called the Vanguard, and after the Skrull invasion, he joins the MI-13 team that includes Captain Britain and Black Knight. When Dracula's son Zaris begins to unite all the vampires of the world, Blade teams up with the X-Men, who reluctantly resurrect Dracula again to stop him. When Thanos invades Earth a few years later, Blade joins the modern Mighty Avengers, first wearing an alternate Spider-Man suit and later Hawkeye's Ronin armor to hide his identity. After briefly teaming up with Ghost Rider and Satan's Kids at the Spirits of Vengeance in 2018, he forms a new Midnight Suns team and then joins the new Avengers team after Dracula's son Zaris returns to lead a rebellion against his father. A new vampire nation is established in Chernobyl, and they're recognized as a country by the United Nations. Blade then leaves the team and takes it upon himself to move to the vampire nation to keep them in check, bringing us to where we are now. Following the Wesley Snipes trilogy, rapper Sticky Fingers portrayed the vampire hunter in a short-lived sequel series on the Spike channel in 2006. And in 2011, Blade was one of a few select Marvel heroes, along with Iron Man and Wolverine, to receive a special anime series from Madhouse Studios. With Marvel Studios, it's unclear how Blade will fit into the cinematic universe, but with him already appearing in Eternals post-credit scene teasing Black Knight, it seems like we'll see something more faithful to the comics this time around. There's been rumors this film would feature a team, so we could see the vampire hunting squad from Tomb of Dracula, or a more supernatural-focused team like the Midnight Suns. In the comics, it was revealed that Blade had a daughter with his ex-lover Saffron named Brielle, who's also a vampire hunter under the codename Bloodline. She made her debut this summer in Free Comic Book Day issue, although her character was originally planned to be introduced back in 2015. If you want to check out some Blade comics, the Tomb of Dracula series from the 70s is a great place to start, as it's really one of the best horror comics Marvel's ever published. He's also in a few black and white comics from the same time, which you can find collected in the Blade the Vampire Slayer black and white book. The Tomb of Dracula series is even available in black and white collected editions, as well as their original colored format. The 1991 Tomb of Dracula series is worth checking out for the artwork alone, but good luck finding it. The Night Stalkers and Midnight Suns comics from the 90s are also fun, as this was the first time Blade's potential was really embraced with the greater Marvel Universe. His 10-issue series that followed in 1994 was his first ever solo title, and this was also the first time he was featured by himself without a supporting team for the entire run. The artwork is pretty standard 90s, but it's not as good as his 3-issue miniseries in 1998. After this, there's the 2006 series that featured the return of Blade's father, which you can get collected all in one book. I highly recommend his 2013 outing with the Mighty Avengers, and the more recent Avengers stuff does a lot with vampires, as well as characters we're seeing in the MCU right now. So that's worth reading too. Until the new film with Mahershala Ali releases in 2023, Blade will be featured in a new Midnight Sun series in September, and then he'll be in the Vampire Nation one-shot in November. And his daughter Bloodline will be appearing in this October's Crypto Shadows issue. So hopefully we continue to see more.